Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stories with Heart panel. My name is Marlene Harris, and I'm one of the science fiction and fantasy columnists at Library Journal. I'll be moderating this session, Stories with Heart, which features stories that are all about relationships, family relationships, friendships, and of course, romantic relationships. I hope that you'll love all of these books and their authors as much as I do, which is why I'm excited to welcome them to talk about their books. First up, we have Amy Chase, comics and prose writer who has done officially licensed work with My Little Pony, Archie Horror, Dungeons and Dragons, and more, and is here to talk about her debut graphic novel, Abuzz, a romantic comedy inspired by Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, set in fictional Messina High School instead of the streets of Renaissance Messina. Next up, we have Mari Costa, the author of last year's fantasy shoestring theory about a cat and his mage, but she's here today to talk about her graphic novel, The Demon of Beausoleil, the story of a demon and his bodyguard who fall in love and defy the assumptions of pretty much everybody around them. Wendy Martin is the author of the hit webtoon series Castle Swimmer, which has been turned into the graphic novel series that she'll be talking about today. It's not just about the romance between two young people whose lives are both ruled by prophecy, but it also manages to dig deeply into family relationships, the lack thereof, the relationship between a leader and their people, and all while telling a terrific coming-of-age story times two. Bethany Rutter's third YA novel, she's also published 2 novels for adults, is a story that I keep calling Realer Than Real because it's very much real and so much a story about a plus-size teenager who is doing her absolute damnedest to accept who she is, no matter how many haters she faces, all while being a mentor for her little sister and poking her older brother about his toxicity. It's sure to remind readers of their own high school experiences, no matter how far back those experiences are in their rearview mirror. And last but definitely not least, because this was the longest novel in the bunch, Samantha Sotto Yambao's debut novel was the marvelous, sadly fluffy, relationshipy, beautifully sweet, bittersweet Water Moon. We're here to talk about her second novel, The Elsewhere Express, which has some of those same magical realism elements, but it's set on a fantasy-driven train that takes its passengers away from reality to an elsewhere that's in danger if they can't solve the mystery. And now that we're all here, before we get into the actual heart of the discussion about stories with heart, I want to talk about the where, when, and how of their settings, because these 5 stories are on a spectrum from the reality of contemporary high schools, or their British equivalents, through a portal that shifts from the real to the fantastic, and then right into worlds built entirely of fantasy. So, to welcome you all to all of this, we'll start by talking about the way that each of these stories is set in terms of time and place and perspective, and get at why each of you made the choices that you did, because these settings and their range of reality have a big influence on the themes and how the relationships work out based on what they have to work with. So we're going to start with Bethany, because your story is the one that is the most real. And it's a setting that's so real that it hurts. And I mean that seriously and in all the best ways. It also reads as universal, even though it's very specifically British and not American. The story that is the closest to real life of this panel has a lot to say about bullying, and mixed in with that, there's a lot of very positive romantic comedy feels. What made you choose to make the bullying so much of a theme that even a teacher is doing it? And somewhere, is there a poll on how badly we all want to stomp that teacher?
So I really feel that the experiences that we have as teenagers, especially in relationship to our bodies, are so formative and they stay with us for such a long time. For me, at least, that was where the groundwork was laid for my relationship to everything from like romance to exercise that I then carried into adulthood. And, I don't know what it was like where you went to school, but for me, exercise was something that was for people who were like good at it. But when I look back, no one I went to school with is now now a professional athlete. So it does make me wonder if that's the best approach to take to physical education in schools. And it's only as an adult that I've really been able to develop a great relationship with movement and to like train as a personal trainer and try and work with people who have had a similar kind of experience in terms of not developing a positive and healthy bond with, you know, bodies and physical movement, and trying to undo some of the damage that was done as a teenager. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to sort of Trojan horse with my books, is the idea that a different way of doing things is possible.
Thank you. Thank you. And no, it was the same when I was in high school too, and that was in the dark ages. Um, Amy, you're next. You've said that the story in Abuzz is based on Shakespeare's comedy, Much Ado About Nothing. And that is really clear in the story. If you go in knowing that, you're really sure about it when you're done. But Shakespeare obviously didn't set his story in a high school. Oh God, I just imagined that. What made a high school such a perfect location for Shakespeare? And which came first in your mind, the play, the characters, or the setting?
So like Bethany said, I definitely agree with the idea of those formative high school years really shaping you in many ways. And so high school was a formative time for me becoming a fan of Shakespeare in the literary sense and learning the different ways that it could be adapted and that it wasn't just stuck in the past. And, you know, a lot of people feel it's really inaccessible in that way. And so, you know, being exposed to stories like She's the Man and 10 Things I Hate About You, that was one of those things that I always wanted to do my own version for with Much Ado About Nothing. And that, you know, I'd say maybe the play came first as the desire, but it came simultaneously with the understanding of the themes of miscommunication and, you know, a lot of he said, she said, and falling in and out of love. Also felt very much like, you know, things I remembered from high school, people and different stories, even if I didn't experience them, hearing them from around the schoolyard. So it really felt like a natural transition for me. And then I'd say the characters were almost the last part of that because I needed to understand the setting to decide where they would fit within the hierarchy. And I'd be remiss not to mention the fabulous artist I worked with, Stelladia, who actually did all of the character designs. And once they had kind of given me the visual language of our cast, their roles and their places in this high school just perfectly clicked.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam, it's your turn to talk about the Elsewhere Express, which reads very much like a portal fantasy. You know, we go from the characters go from one world to another. So they start in the real, and then they step into a dangerous wonderland, or maybe Oz. Every detail of the magic helps propel the slip from the mundane to the magical, while the train itself is every bit as much of a character in the story as the human and human-like characters. Where did that inspiration come from, and why was it the right place or vehicle or character to bring this story together?
Great question. I was actually on a train when when the idea came to me. I was on the Tokyo Metro, and I just noticed how even if the train was full, nobody was actually there. It was as if everybody had gone elsewhere. You know, you could be staring at your phones, looking out the window, staring to space, and that just made me wonder, okay, so if no one is here, where did they go? Where do thoughts go? And that made me imagine an actual train of thought. So I took it in a very literal sense. And I thought, like, okay, so if thoughts wander, what happens if they go too far? What actually keeps us in our seats on the train? And I felt that that was a sense of purpose. And therefore, I started to think, okay, so if you don't have a sense of purpose, do you get lost? Do you hop off this train and hop on this other train of thought? So that was the whole process about how the book came about. And I thought that it was the perfect setting for the themes that I wanted to tackle because they're quite intense themes in terms of, you know, because you're talking about purpose, you're talking about identity, you're talking about grief. And I felt that putting it in a magical setting made it almost easier to explore and look at because of all the pretty shiny things in the background. So while you're discussing these heavier themes, you have something nice to look at.
Yes, and you've just given a whole new meaning to a phrase that I often use about train of thought derailment when you talk. Thank you. Okay, Mary, you've set your story in a kind of a quasi-Europe among the aristocracy, more or less, at a time period that seems historical-ish, but isn't fully defined. And the art is suggestive of all of that, but it's never definitive. So the world that Hal and Elias inhabit sort of suggests a lot of things about time and place, but doesn't really go into details. Instead, the details all in the characters, particularly the way the eyes are the windows to the soul, which was just fantastic. But the overall setting, what inspired that, both in terms of what it's intended to be and in why that choice for it, and then did the setting decide the characters or the other way around?
So like it's kind of a gas lamp romance, that sort of genre is one of my favorites of all time, and I'd never been able to work on it before. And The Demon of Beausoleil is very much like one of my most self-indulgent projects. I wasn't making it for profit. I wasn't making it for anyone else to read. I was just making it because I was kind of miserable in university. So I decided to just set it where like one of my favorite, like some of my favorite stories were set, which is like, you know, Victorian England, kind of a like, you know, that gas lamp feel. But because it was very self-indulgent, I didn't feel like researching very specific things about Victorian England. So I just compromised with myself and I decided that it was going to be kind of a fantasy-ish, because there is magic in the Demon of Beausoleil version of Victorian England with fake names for cities and fake names for countries, etc. That can be like similar enough that people can like place themselves, and I can still like insert my like Brazilian heritage in Elias specifically. But like far away enough that nobody can call me out on something if I do end up deciding to publish this like very self-indulgent private work down the line, which I did, and nobody's called me out on it yet. So
Fantastic. Wendy, you're last this time around, but not always. The undersea world of Castle Swimmer was absolutely gorgeous. The contrast between the dark castle and the bright open undersea was such an eye-opener, both for Siren and the reader, and it reflects the differences between Siren's people and the others. How much of an influence was that dark light contrast, which was reflected both in the story and the art, on the way the story progressed and the portrayal of Siren's people? What made this work for this story, and why did you choose it?
I think because I work with graphic novels, I tend to approach things first through the artwork and visually. And I think the initial reason for making everything so dark for the Castle of the Sharks was to really emphasize our other main character, Kappa, who is literally glowing and shining, to make him stand out even more in that setting. And I think it overall ended up helping with the theme of these sharks who are cursed, living in this very dark situation. And Kappa is kind of this shining beacon of hope for them that's there to change everything, and also changes everything for Siren. So a lot of times I just make aesthetically pleasing decisions in my work, and it just happens to work out perfectly for the themes of the story. So
Terrific. Thank you. And it did. It did work. Moving along, because this is the Stories with Heart panel, which means all of the stories featured have a romantic relationship in them, but they also have other type of relationships with family and friendships. So the next question is about the romances, and then there'll be some follow-ups about the other central relationships in the stories. And this is the point where the first panel comes in, I hope. And yes, this is from The Demon of Beausoleil. It on the one hand, it marks a turning point in Helen Elias's relationship, and on the other, and part of what I wanted to show was that the way the eyes are literally windows into the soul, and you can see where Hel is trying to hide, even though he's in plain sight, and where he's trying to pretend. And it's about both of them thinking that they can't have what they want and they have to settle for what they believe they deserve. And in the end, hell ends up with the dog, because isn't that exactly what happens? We can't have the one we love, so we cuddle up with the nearest animal. But the romance between Elias and Hal in general over the course of the story, it hits so many notes so well and all at the same time. It's grumpy sunshine. You can guess which is which. It's flirty versus stoic. It's opposites attract. It's upstairs, downstairs, and it's a bodyguard romance. It's also a banter-driven romance that's a whole lot more than just talk. While in the end, it's a story about how important it is to be loved for who you really are and not to settle for anything less. So what parts of that did you intend to emphasize when you started doing your self-indulgent project?
I guess all of it. Like, I love tropes. I never shy away from tropes. I usually tend to build characters first and then story. So doing the Demon of Beausoleil was basically, I had these two guys. I believe Helianthus was originally a D&D character, so basically just character. And I wanted to smash them together in a story that I could tell that would be, again, really self-indulgent and really fun for me to create and work on. And yep, this is the final page actually of the Demon of Beausoleil. He just ends up with a dog. That's really crazy. No, I'm kidding. uh, yeah, I wanted to emphasize, like, this is all of some of my favorite romantic tropes. Like, the only one that isn't here that is in the shoestring theory is like second chance romance. I love second chance romance, but like grumpy sunshine, um, like kind of someone who is reluctant about love versus someone who's like very open about it, but in a cagey way. Like, that's some of my favorite romances, and I really wanted to get it all in.
And you did. You did. Wendy, now your turn. The romance in Castle Swimmer is so dependent on the setting, and it grows out of the way they've both been isolated all their lives. They're both children of prophecy, and that they support each other's dreams even at the expense of their own. And yet they have their own path to follow, and they are following it apart. What made you put them on separate paths in the third book?
The initial reason was because I really wanted Siren and Kappa as characters to like develop on their own and not be completely defined by their relationship, which I think you can also do that when the characters are together. And it was actually very controversial for my readers when I separated them and forced them to be apart. But I also just love the kind of yearning that comes when you separate the two lovers and that anticipation of them finally reuniting. I really love that in the stories, so that's why I explored that.
Thank you. It was beautiful. And Bethany, the romance in Slow Burn, it's very sweet. It does live up to its title, so there is truth in titles. Also, I personally love the way that the romance is the icing on the cake and not the cake. That the cake is that Ruby runs for herself and her own vindication, and she's rewarded for those things. That she's not changing herself for boy or for society's approval. Was that the way you intended this race to be run? Was that what it was about?
Yes, and it's always very nice when people observe that in my books, because I feel like most of my books are really about personal development plus romance. But first and foremost, they are kind of about self-love and learning about yourself and how you want to exist in the world. And it's nice if you can have a romantic storyline with someone else, but I think it's incredibly healing and affirming to learn as young as possible that the most important relationship you will ever have is, you know, essentially with yourself. And of course, for my main character in Slow Burn, Ruby, a lot of her ideas around self-worth are kind of muddled or obscured by the fact that she is plus size, which is something that can feel feel especially kind of thorny when you are a young person. And so I wanted to write a romance for a plus size teen girl character because, you know, we do have those as well. That those storylines are also possible, even if you are not thin.
There aren't enough of those stories for adults either. Sam, but thank you. That's part of why I loved this one so much, because it hit a lot of memory. So thank you. Sam, the romance, I need to get off my own feels. The romance in the Elsewhere Express seemed to kind of squeak out a happy ending. I was actually expecting that to be more bittersweet and possibly going all the way to bitter. But like Slow Burn, it seemed as if the romance was the icing. The cake was about solving the mystery, putting the train back together, and it was also about, as you said earlier, sacrifice and duty and purpose and the importance of those things in your life. Were you always intending that the happy ending would finally come out there at the end, or did it sneak up on you too? And if so, how and why?
Um, yeah, it definitely snuck up on me because, first of all, they only spend one night on the train together. So I felt that, and on this night, they're never really in the same place mentally. Like Q wants to get off the train, and Q wants to stay on. Sorry, 4 a.m. brain. Q wants to stay on the train, and Raya wants to get off the train. And it's only towards the latter part of the book where they kind of meet in terms of mentality. So they don't really get to spend that much time together. And I felt that with the original ending, which is actually the ending before the prologue, I feel that they didn't get a chance to actually be together. And so I felt that I needed to almost have a choose your own adventure type of ending. Like if you're a realist and somewhat, you like bittersweet endings, you can stop there. You don't have to read the prologue. I mean the epilogue. But if you're hoping for that happy ending, then continue on and read the epilogue, because that's how I actually, processed it myself. I actually wrote the end before the epilogue. And then I go like, I can't leave the two of you this way. And I went back and gave them something I felt that they earned.
And they did, and it was terrific. But I kept thinking, no, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And then they did. Which was great. Okay, thank you, Amy. You're up next, or last in this category. How much of the romances in your story were predicated on your source in Shakespeare? Because the story does such a terrific job of allowing everybody to see bits of themselves in all of the characters. But you also were doing a great job of putting into that romantic comedy all of the trying out relationships part of high school, and then the added dimensions of the contemporary characters representing a very wide spectrum of representation along all of the axes that would be present in a typical American high school. So that was a lot to pack in. And where was the shoehorn?
Well, yeah, it was very easy and very difficult. I felt very comforted as a debut graphic novel, having the kind of guardrails of the understanding of the original play, but then having the freedom and almost the need to interpret it differently, because the original play takes place in a week and it ends with a wedding, and we can't do that in a high school book. I mean, I could, but that would be, not the vibe we were going for. But I wanted to, again, try to represent the kind of whirlwind nature of it while these characters are still very much learning who they are. We kind of thought of the characters in different representations of, like, either they know who they are personally, but they are struggling to fit in the social hierarchy, or they know exactly who they are, because of their peers and their representation within the high school, but then they are having an internal journey figuring out who they are and what they really want. And it was really important to me to represent not only a bunch of different gender and sexuality presentations, but especially to add ace representation into a romance dialogue, because I think a lot of people will also just assume, if you have an aromantic character or an asexual character, they're just not going to be part of that story. But I wanted to make sure that we had some of that as well, because some of my best friends in high school came out later in life, and I just remember all of those good times we had, and knowing that they had to hide parts of themselves, or they were still learning about who they were, didn't change my feelings towards them. But it also, I wanted to see that reflected in the kind of messiness and the fun of figuring out who you are in high school, who you like, who you have a crush on, and then of course, with all of that kind of miscommunication, it's easy for the characters to even miscommunicate with themselves because they're still learning those things.
Thank you. And don't relax yet, because the next thing is a panel from Abuzz. So you're still in the hot seat. I was looking for something that showed as many of the characters as possible. And this is actually the end panel. And on the left-hand side, you've got Hero and Claudio. And then in the middle, you've got Ben and Beatrice, who are characters from the play. And this is how they're translated into this high school setting. The B thing in the back is the mascot for the school, which also explains the title. And then you've got the background of the other characters in the school who are part of the background action. But what I wanted to talk about here were the friendships, the friendship between Claudio and Ben, and then the cousin/sibling-like relationship between Hero and Beatrice, and what would honestly be the nightmare for any high school student of having your mother be the principal. And they were all part of the bedrock of the story. So, there was so much there. What I think the one I'm most curious about is why did you inflict my mother, the principal, on poor Hero?
Oh my goodness. Well, that again came with that kind of language of adapting into the high school hierarchy and looking at situations where a lot of the friendships or the familial relationships do exist in the play. I mean, Governor Leonato is the father of Hero, and Beatrice is Hero's cousin. And so I wanted to keep kind of the natural familial stuff, but in then choosing that Leo was the principal, and that was almost to inflict extra drama. And so that was a consideration with those parts of the social hierarchy in a high school. And this wasn't indicative of my own experience, but my mom was the school librarian when I was in elementary school. And I know that some teachers thought that I would get special privilege because my mother worked at the school, so they were a little extra hard on me. And so I kind of remembered those dynamics and the social element. And I thought it was also important then, with Hero being in the lowest social position, being our freshie, kind of having that expectation of, I'm overshadowed by my cousin and my mother. But I wanted to represent those friendships that you find in high school as well through, being on the basketball team or being cheerleaders together and different interest clubs. And so again, once I worked with Stelladia to kind of develop the characters and the visual language of it, a lot of those details really fit into place, and they were considered for maximum drama impact or just the natural kind of ecosystem of a high school. And while we have this panel up, I just want to quickly shout out the rest of the creative team, because I worked with so many amazing people. So the art was by Stelladia, the colors are by Ellie Wright, and then the lettering, which is scant on this page because it's the end page, but all the word bubbles were put in by Taylor Esposito. So that was the whole team behind this book.
And they did a terrific job.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bethany, the relationship besides the romance that stood out for me in Slow Burn was the relationship between Ruby and her little sister Sasha, that she so much wants to give Sasha a positive example to follow. And so I'm wondering, was that the plan, that she was there to, part of her function was to give her sister a better perspective on the world she's growing up into? Or was a lot of it just, my God, somebody needed to counteract their brother?
So that dynamic was really important for me, because I think, especially if you are someone who feels like you have a lot of kind of, shortcomings or whatever, you don't see the way that you can potentially be a positive role model for people in your lives. We only sort of see ourselves as maybe the recipient of other people's negativity, which is the relationship that Ruby has with her brother, rather than a potential kind of vessel for positivity. You know, naturally we kind of focus on the negative a lot. You know, you can get as many compliments as you want, but you're way more likely to remember like a negative comment. So I really wanted to write this relationship between Ruby and her sister Sasha, where Ruby actually has a lot of kind of power and influence over her younger sister, whether she realizes that initially or not. There's actually a lot of potential for her to be the opposite in her sister's life of the presence that her brother has been for her. You know, her brother's bullying and negativity kind of takes up a lot of the social oxygen in their family, but this is a way that she can kind of rewrite that story for her younger sister.
And it was terrific. That was just so heartwarming to see that, because we're all looking for that even still. So Wendy, going back to talking about people and their families, the relationship between Siren and his mother, which is just, you know, it's heartbreaking, and it's there's so much history in it. I read the whole series in one weekend, so it's all, yeah, all together in one big ball for me. It was great though. And the other part of it is Siren's relationship with his people, and also his mother's relationship with their people. Because Siren has a problem accepting what they feel for him, because because he's been isolated, and his people are having a problem dealing with how to relate to his mother and all of that. There's a big web about the relationship between people and the relationship between a leader and the people that they serve and lead. And what was going on in there, and where was that coming out of?
Now, even though the castle, they kind of have this hierarchy with queen and people, they kind of, because of what they're going through, they kind of behave more like one giant family, which I think is very messy in a family when one family member does something very bad. As opposed to like someone distant or a stranger, I feel like your response to somebody hurting you is to just distance from that person. But when it's a family member, you kind of have to, there's this need to like patch things up and try to make it work. And especially with Siren and his mother, I think he definitely wanted to, you know, he loves her. He wants to make things work with her and continue the relationship. But as he'll find out, that it's because of what she did that has changed him and changed their relationship permanently. And he's going to have to deal with the things that she did and how it's changed him. So yeah, I just like exploring all that messy family stuff and conflict.
And you did, and it's really well done. Thank you. Mari, while the spotlight in the story is on Hel's relationship with Elias, there's also a whole lot of interesting stuff that kind of fits in around the edges about families and acceptance and forgiveness. What were you intending with the way that Hel's change in attitude about his earlier behavior with his family changes their reactions to him and the relationships that they all have?
I mean, Yante is like a kind of a very hurt character who lashes out, but it's never the fault of his family. So they're the easiest people to lash out on, because he just kind of knows that they're not really going to like give him too much like flack for like his attitude. But when he goes too far, like that's when they cut him off, and that is the inciting incident for the entire story. The like actual emotional arc of the demon of Beausoleil isn't like we have to kill as many demons as possible, like we have to exorcise all these demons to save the city. The arc is Yanthi has to get right with his sister because he really screwed up. And to do that, he needs to be able to like become a better person and develop and like realize that life has dealt him like a bad hand, but he can't just lash out on the people who truly love him, and he needs to like be able to let people in. And it's not just about Elias, it's about like the entire family, and like getting right with everyone who loves him, and like finding his own like family. Found family, I feel, is like a very prevalent topic in especially queer stories. So it's something that I always am drawn towards and end up writing, even if I intend to or not.
Thank you. Yeah, yes. Thinking about the story. Okay. Sam, back to the Elsewhere Express. The train itself is a character, and it's an important character. But one of the most important relationships in the story, besides that potential relationship between Raya and Q, is the relationship between the train and its two most prominent agents, the conductor Lily and her predecessor Rasmus. I had a cat named Rasmus. And what their relationship was with the train and with each other, and what was that intended to be, and did it work the way you thought?
I hope so. Uh, um, I see Lily and Rasmus as almost the what if scenario for Raya and Q. It's like, what would happen if they made other choices? And I also think that they reflect the point of view of a reader that may come into the book thinking, I want to stay on this train rather than I need to get off this train. So I wanted that to be almost as a foil to Raya and Q, to have a completely different attitude towards the train and to show what you would have to give up in order to stay on a train without a destination for all of eternity. A train that asks you to give up so much of yourself to stay on this quote unquote paradise.
Wow. Just wow. Okay, we need to escape from that question and move into the final big question in here, which is that in all of your stories, there's a theme about escape or running, from the literal to the figurative. And so that's what I want to talk about for this last question before we let the attendees escape and all of you. And that means that we're going to bring up the panel from Castle Swimmer that shows the dark light, and it also shows the relationship that Siren has with his mother, because there they are, and they're trying to talk real instead of talking past each other. It's not completely working, but then it never does. And then in the background of the bottom right panel, you can see the brighter world outside that he wants to escape to, and that she's finally recognized that he has to. So the need for escape is built into the whole series. It starts out with both Kappa and Siren needing to escape from the shark's castle for different reasons, but they both need to escape. Kappa needs to live, and Siren needs to escape from his destiny. So this is about what happens after that. And they're both trying to find a way forward. And, it's part of it, I'm sure it's a question you've gotten asked a lot. But where are they heading? Because the third book is all about ways that they get past what happened before. What are they moving towards? And more importantly, in some ways, are they going to get back together?
Well, if you have read ahead on the webtoon, you would know the answer to that question. But for the book readers, I guess we'll find out. But yes, this is a story about queer characters. And I think if you are someone who's queer and you grow up in a household similar to mine, where it has a certain type of family and an area that's not ideal for a queer person, there's kind of always this need to escape. And I think there's parallel themes in this story. And with Siren and Kappa, they both have these heavy expectations placed onto them. And I feel like they will never grow as people until they physically escape from those expectations. But they find out eventually that just escaping physically is not quite enough to solve all their problems and all their troubles. So it's going to take a lot more work from them to truly escape their destinies.
And this book was the third book was definitely about the work.
Yes.
Not always successful, but about the work. Okay, thank you. Sam, the Elsewhere Express, you've talked a little bit about this, but the express itself is an escape. Q specifically wants to escape from the fate that he'll have if he stays in the real world. But is it the metaphor for everybody? Partly it's the metaphor for the grass is always greener. Also, the idea that in order to escape from your past, you have to forget it, which is part of the introduction to the train. And then, I think you've talked about why a train, but this is also, it feels like it's about trying to, is this about an escape from the humdrum? Is it about reinventing yourself, or where is that going?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that, I mean, unless you're like in prison, nobody's actually trying to escape a place, but we're all trying to escape at one point or another our circumstances and our own thoughts. And I felt that the train was a good vehicle for that because it's literally, as I said, a train of thought. And it's interesting because if you board a train of thought to escape your thoughts, I don't think there's really actually any way you can outrun what you're escaping from. So that was the point that I was trying to make. It's like your own worst enemy most of the time are your own thoughts, and you can either work with them or use them as a means of escape, or you can confront them. And I felt that the train worked well because it's something that's fast. You can try to outrun them, but can you really outrun yourself?
Thank you. Definitely food for thought. And I'm thinking, okay, Mari, Hell, it feels like the story of, you talked about Hell and his family, but also he's running away from himself. He got hurt, he got rejected, so he decided to be somebody completely different, and somebody to whom those things had not happened. And so he lives up to or down to societal expectations because he thinks that's a way of not being hurt. And it's at the point at the end where he rejects his baby niece, who is just like him, because that voice in his head is still saying he's not worthy and that he's wrong to exist. So I think that ending was a gut punch. Was that where you were always going, or how did that come about, that big reveal at the end of he's still not quite happy with himself even though he's happier?
Yeah, the bonus comic at the end with the niece actually came like a couple years after I had finished the Demon of Beausoleil. It was like exclusive to like the print edition. So I'm really happy people are talking about it. Yippee. But it was something that was like percolating in my mind for a while, that um like how would Helianthes react to a new Cambion like being put out into the world. And I think initially it would be so negative because despite the fact that his life is like pretty good now, he's got like a partner who loves him, his family loves him as well. He has a job, he has like stability, he has a beautiful dog who's never gonna die. um like like he can't guarantee that every single Cambion is going to have that, and that like brings back a lot of like really repressed feelings for him that he still needs to deal with, turns out. And it kind of underscores the fact that growth isn't linear. You can like relapse. It's a matter of like coming back and like really sitting with yourself and making sure that um that you're not going to like fully spiral down.
Thank you. You've also just named the best part of the whole fantasy, the idea that a companion animal that you love is immortal.
That dog, I feel like the timeline has gone. He's had that dog for like 30 years at this point. No, it's never gonna die.
Yay. Um, Amy, over to you, because we've already gotten the 10-minute warning. As much as people might want to run away from high school, especially one where their mom is the principal, Hero's usual form of escape seems to have been into themselves. They get drawn out of their shell, they start a relationship, they get involved with clubs, then the bullying gang comes along and sets everything back because everybody believes them instead of thinking it through. So how did you decide that that was the way to get in Don Juan's bullying from the original play?
Well, oh my goodness, that was one of the best little bits that Shakespeare left us, where Don John's motivation is simply that he is a plain dealing villain, and if I am evil, let me be evil. He has no true deeper motivations than hating love. But you know, in a story like this, as much as I could kind of keep it light, I still use the small hook of kind of having him be in the social hierarchy as well. He and his gang are part of they're the juniors, so they don't have the status of the seniors, but they're above the sophomores and freshies. And so kind of that little dynamic with his stepbrother Pedro plays into that. But it was really important to me that in all of that and all this drama that I've created, and, you know, again, maximum drama with the principal as your mother, the bullying is never directed at someone's identity or what they look like or their sexuality, because I also wanted to maintain the space for the romantic comedy to still celebrate those identities. And, you know, if you're trying to kind of have a nice little wrap up at the end in the Shakespeare-esque way, there's a lot to come back from if people are actually out there doing kind of hateful things towards someone's identity. So all of the conflict is at the end about communication and people's position in the hierarchy of the school. And so again, once I feel like the bullies were kind of the bullies and the guidance counselor and her right hand hall monitor, they were kind of the last pieces of the puzzle, because they are the B plot of that play. But to speak to Hero, I mean, they are one of my most self-assured characters in the script. I feel like they know who they are exactly. But again, as they're trying to figure out where that version of them, who they know so completely, fits in the school, that causes a lot of friction. And so unlike the play, we can't have a child faking their own death as well. There were a lot of things that, you know, works great for Shakespeare, doesn't work so great for high school. And so seeking that outward acceptance, the natural withdrawal is exchanging the social pressures for the stability that they know, which in this case happens to be, you know, hiding in their dark but wonderfully decorated room. Again, with so much character detail put into that by Stelladia, they got to decorate Hero's entire bedroom as well. And there's a lot of fun references to like the music they like and the movies and the kind of the plants they keep. And that, again, just really served to build their character. And really, to me, they are the most self-assured personally. It's just with the social conflict, as most characters in the play or in the graphic novel, I'm sorry, fall into one of those categories as well.
Thank you. And Bethany, Ruby's story. This is the only one where there's actual running instead of metaphorical running. But she can't actually outrun everything that one might want her to outrun in this story. So it's about her maintaining the positive attitude. But with her literal running, again, she's showing her sister that she can do anything she wants to and be whoever she wants to, and can get the haters out of her own head as much as possible. And Ruby's running more than just running.
Yeah, so slow burn is my kind of running for people who have been told they can't or shouldn't run propaganda. I'm a runner. I'm a relatively slow runner. I run roughly an 11-minute mile, which among runners is considered slow, whatever, I don't care. But because you cannot take running away from me, because, you know, for me, it's running, but it's like outdoor time. It's listening to podcasts. It's where I get to see the local pets of my neighborhood. It's clearing my head when I've been indoors all day. And it's also for me very symbiotic with writing, because it's proof that if I set an intention and I kind of meet it on my own terms, I can get a task done, even if it seems, you know, incredibly hard or scary. You know, when I set out to write a novel, the moment where the book is finished is so far away from where you start with a blank page. And so having this practice in my life where I'm doing something that I personally find really difficult, but also very rewarding, I see in lots of ways as kind of cross-training for writing novels. So for me, running is about kind of creating my own boundaries and my own ways of like approaching it and then applying that to other areas of my life. So for me and for Ruby in the book, running is always kind of more than just running, especially because it's so kind of gate-kept by people who want it to be just for the people who are like good at it.
Agreed. Yes. And that's a wrap, because I'd love to keep going, but we're all out of time. So it is time for me to say thank you so much to all of our speakers and to thank all of the librarians and educators who have joined us today. Next